In the annals of history, some names echo with the clangor of glory, while others whisper through the shadows of infamy. Gilles de Rais is one such name, a man who once stood as a celebrated knight, a war hero fighting alongside the legendary Joan of Arc, only to descend into a nightmare of unspeakable horror. His story is not just one of valor and betrayal, but a soul bartered away in a dark pact that stained the pages of history with blood and terror. Imagine a young nobleman, born into privilege and power in early 15th century France. Gilles de Rais was heir to vast estates, wealth beyond measure, and a lineage steeped in nobility. His early years promised a future of honor and influence. Yet, beneath the gilded surface of his upbringing lay a turbulent storm, a childhood marked by loss, neglect, and the corrupting influence of a cruel grandfather. This was a boy who, left untethered by guidance, would soon spiral into a world where the boundaries between power and depravity blurred. The backdrop to Gilles' rise was the brutal 100 Years' War, a conflict that tore France apart and forged legends in its fires. It was here, amid the chaos of battle, that Gilles first made his mark. His courage and skill earned him prestigious title of Marshal of France, the highest military honor of the time. He fought valiantly alongside Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, in the pivotal siege that turned the tide against the English invaders. To the world, Gilles de Rais was a hero, a shining example of chivalry and loyalty. But as the war waned and Joan's light was extinguished by execution, Gilles' life took a dark turn. The battlefield's harsh discipline gave way to a life of reckless extravagance and obsession. His vast fortune, once a symbol of his power, became a tool of ruin. Lavish feasts, costly entertainments, and a retinue of hundreds drained his coffers. Yet, it was not mere decadence that consumed him. It was a descent into occult practices and a sinister hunger that would horrify even the darkest imaginations. The rumors began quietly, whispers among peasants and servants of children vanishing near Gilles' castles. Boys, often poor and vulnerable, lured by promises of food or work, disappeared without a trace. The nobleman's name was spoken in hushed tones, but fear and social hierarchy silenced most. How could man of such stature be questioned? Who would dare challenge a Marshal of France? It was only when Gilles' reckless actions, notably the kidnapping of clergymen over a property dispute, drew the ire of powerful allies that the veil began to lift. An investigation was launched, and what emerged was a nightmare beyond comprehension. Testimonies from accomplices and witnesses painted a gruesome picture of ritualistic torture and murder, of children sacrificed in dark ceremonies, and a man who had sold his soul to forces beyond understanding. The trial of Gilles de Rais in 1440 was a spectacle of medieval justice, a clash of secular and ecclesiastical powers. The charges were staggering: heresy, sodomy, and the murder of over 100 children. Under the threat of torture, Gilles confessed in harrowing detail, describing acts so vile they defy belief. Yet, even in his final moments, he maintained a strained composure, seeking forgiveness and penance. His execution was as dramatic as his life. Hanged and burned in Nantes, his death marked by a chilling ritual of public repentance. Yet, the legacy of Gilles de Rais would endure, inspiring legends like Bluebeard and haunting the collective memory as perhaps history's first documented serial killer. But who was Gilles de Rais truly? Was he a monster born of his time, a victim of circumstance, or a man who consciously chose darkness over light? This is a story of a knight who sold his soul, a tale of power, madness, an eternal struggle between good and evil. As we delve deeper into the life and crimes of Gilles de Rais, we will uncover complexities of a man shaped by war, privilege, and a profound inner darkness. We will explore the chilling details of his crimes, the societal forces that allowed them to flourish, and the enduring questions that surround his guilt and legacy. Join me as we journey into the shadows of medieval France, to the castles where innocence was stolen and evil took root. This is the story of Gilles de Rais, the knight who sold his soul. To understand Gilles de Rais, we must first step back into the world that shaped him, a world of towering castles, brutal wars, and rigid social hierarchies. Born in 1404, Gilles was heir of one of the most powerful noble families in Brittany and Anjou, regions in northwestern France. His family's wealth was immense, their estate sprawling, their influence far-reaching. Yet, despite this privilege, Gilles' childhood was far from idyllic. Tragedy struck early. By the time he was 11, both of his parents had died, his father in a grisly hunting accident, and his mother from an unknown illness. Suddenly orphaned, Gilles was placed under the care of his maternal grandfather, Gilles de Rais, a man whose reputation was as dark as the forests surrounding their estates. Instead of nurturing the boy's potential, Gilles de Rais exposed Gilles to a harsh, cruel upbringing, teaching him the arts of extortion and banditry rather than honor and responsibility. This neglect and moral corruption planted the seeds of Gilles' later descent. He himself would later confess that his early years were marked by illicit acts and enormous crimes against God. It was a childhood without guidance, where power was wielded without conscience, and cruelty was a tool of control. Yet, Gilles was not without talent. As a young man, he showed remarkable skill on the battlefield. The 100 Years' War was raging, and France was desperate for heroes. Gilles rose quickly through the ranks, his bravery and ferocity earning him the respect of his peers and the favor of the Dauphin, the future King Charles VII. When Joan of Arc burst onto the scene in 1429, claiming divine guidance to save France, Gilles was assigned to protect her. Together, they fought in some of the war's most decisive battles, including the legendary lifting of the Siege of Orleans. For a time, Gilles de Rais was a symbol of hope and valor. His appointment as Marshal of France, the highest military honor, cemented his status as a national hero. But the glory of war was fleeting, and with Joan of Arc's capture and execution in 1431, Gilles' world began to unravel. The war's end left Gilles with a vast fortune but no clear purpose. His military career faded, replaced by a life of excess and obsession. He retreated to his estates, where he indulged in lavish spending, commissioning expensive plays, music, and art. His castles became centers of extravagance, filled with hundreds of servants, soldiers, and entertainers. Yet beneath this veneer of opulence lurked a growing darkness. Financial ruin soon followed. Gilles squandered his inheritance at a staggering rate, selling off family lands to fund his lifestyle. His relatives, alarmed by his reckless behavior, distanced themselves, leaving Gilles increasingly isolated. It was during this period of decline that the rumors began, whispers of children disappearing near his castles, of strange lights and cries heard in the dead of night. The victims were mostly poor boys, vulnerable and voiceless. Many were beggars or servants, lured by promises of food, clothing, or work. Some were last seen near the gates of Gilles' estates. Others vanished while tending animals or running errands. Parents, powerless and afraid, dared not confront a man of Gilles' stature. The social order of feudal France placed nobles above reproach, and the lives of peasants were often deemed insignificant. But Gilles' crimes were not random acts of violence. They were part of a horrifying pattern. Testimonies from his trial reveal a chilling ritualistic element: torture, murder, and occult ceremonies designed to summon dark forces. Gilles was obsessed with the occult, employing alchemists and sorcerers in desperate attempts to restore his fortune and gain supernatural power. His conjurer, Francois Prelati, was said to have led him in demonic rituals, including one where Gilles offered the heart and hand of a murdered boy as a sacrifice. The trial records describe acts so brutal they defy comprehension. Children suspended by cords, mutilated, and killed in ceremonies meant to invoke the devil. Gilles himself confessed to these horrors, detailing how he laughed and ejaculated on the bodies of his victims, kissed their severed heads, and reveled in their suffering. It is a portrait of a man who had surrendered his humanity to darkness. Yet, the path to justice was long and fraught. Gilles' noble status shielded him for years. It was only after a reckless act, kidnapping a clergyman over a property dispute, that powerful enemies moved against him. The Bishop of Nantes ordered an investigation, and the floodgates opened. Witnesses came forward, some out of fear, others out of desperation, to tell of missing children and the horrors they had witnessed. The trial itself was a spectacle, combining secular and ecclesiastical courts. Gilles faced charges of heresy, sodomy, murder, and the unlawful imprisonment of the clergyman. The evidence was overwhelming, yet Gilles initially denied the charges, even mocking the court. But under the threat of torture, he confessed fully, offering a detailed account of his crimes and his pact with the devil. His execution was swift and public. On October 26, 1440, Gilles de Rais was hanged and burned in Nantes, His death witnessed by a crowd that chanted prayers and sang hymns. Even in death, his story was paradoxical. He was seen as a penitent sinner, a man who had repented and sought forgiveness. Yet the horror of his deeds lingered, casting a long shadow over history. Gilles de Rais' legacy is complex. To some, he is a cautionary tale of unchecked power and moral decay. To others, a figure of myth and legend, inspiring stories like Bluebeard, the nobleman who murdered his wives. Modern historians continue to debate the extent of his guilt, with some revisionists questioning the validity of his confession, extracted under torture. But the weight of evidence, the testimonies of witnesses, and the brutal reality of his crimes leave little doubt. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, the corrupting influence of power, and the dark recesses of the soul. Gilles de Rais was a man who stood at the crossroads of light and shadow, a knight who sold his soul and paid the ultimate price. As we continue, we will explore the details of his trial, the testimonies that revealed his crimes, and the societal forces that allowed such evil to flourish. We will examine the psychological and historical context that shaped Gilles de Rais, and the enduring fascination his story holds for us today. The trial of Gilles de Rais stands as one of the most extraordinary legal proceedings of the medieval era, not only for sheer horror of the crimes, but also for what it reveals about justice, power, and society in 15th century France. When Gilles was finally arrested in September 1440, the wheels of both secular and ecclesiastical justice began to turn, setting the stage for a confrontation that would expose the darkest corners of human depravity. The charges against Gilles were staggering. He faced accusations of heresy for his dabbling in the occult and summoning of demons, sodomy, the unlawful imprisonment of a clergyman, and most horrifically, the murder and torture of over 100 children. The sheer scale of the allegations was unprecedented, and the trial drew attention far beyond the borders of Brittany. The proceedings were divided into two parallel tracks: the secular inquest, which focused on the criminal acts of murder and assault, and the ecclesiastical trial, which addressed the spiritual crimes of heresy and sorcery. This dual system reflected the complex legal landscape of medieval Europe, where church and state wielded overlapping but distinct powers. Witnesses were summoned from across the region, many of them parents and relatives of the missing children. Their testimonies were heart-wrenching, filled with grief and fear. Mothers spoke of sending their sons to beg at Gilles castles, only to see them vanish without a trace. Some described the chilling indifference of Gilles' servants, who dismissed their concerns or offered false reassurances. Others recounted seeing strange lights and hearing screams echoing from the towers at night. One particularly haunting testimony came from a shoemaker in Machical, who described the sudden disappearance of a boy last seen picking apples near the castle. He spoke of the pervasive fear among villagers, who dare not speak out against a man as powerful as Gilles de Rais. This fear was a crucial factor in allowing the crimes to continue unchecked for so long. The trial also revealed the involvement of Gilles' accomplices, servants, valets, and even clergy who aided in the abductions and murders. Among them were Henriette and Poitou, two valets who confessed to their roles in the atrocities, and Francois Prelati, the conjurer who guided Gilles in his occult practices. Their testimonies painted a grim picture of a network of complicity, bound by fear, loyalty, or shared depravity. Gilles himself initially refused to acknowledge the court's authority, defiantly denying the charges and mocking the judges. His arrogance was short-lived. Faced with the threat of torture, a common and brutal tool of medieval justice, he capitulated. His confession was detailed and chilling, describing acts of torture, mutilation, and murder with a cold, clinical precision. He admitted to luring children into his castles with promises of food and gifts, only to subject them to horrific rituals. He spoke of suspending them by cords, slashing their throats, and offering their body parts in demonic ceremonies. His words revealed a man consumed by madness and evil, who had embraced darkness in a desperate bid for power and salvation. Yet, even in confession, Gilles sought to explain his actions. He blamed his upbringing, his idleness, and the corrupting influence of his grandfather. He claimed to have been driven by a pact with the devil, a bargain made in the hope of regaining his lost fortune and status. This narrative of a soul sold to darkness resonated deeply in a society steeped in religious belief and fear of the supernatural. The judges, both secular and ecclesiastical, faced a difficult task. They had to balance the demands of justice with the realities of power and politics. Gilles was a nobleman, a war hero, and a man with powerful allies. Yet the evidence was overwhelming, and the public outcry was immense. On October 25, 1440, the court delivered its verdict. Gilles de Rais was found guilty on all counts. The sentence was death by hanging and burning, a punishment reserved for the most heinous crimes and heretics. The execution was scheduled for the following day. The day of Gilles' execution was marked by a somber procession. He was led from the castle to a meadow overlooking the Loire River, where 3 gibbets had been erected. The crowd that gathered was immense, a mixture of curiosity, horror, and a desire for justice. Gilles knelt and begged forgiveness, his demeanor calm and contrite. As he was hanged, flames were lit beneath the pyres. When the fire consumed the rope, his body fell into the flames. For noble women rushed forward to retrieve his remains, ensuring he received a Christian burial in the church of Notre Dame du Carmel in Nantes. His accomplices, Henriette and Poitou, were also executed and burned. The aftermath of Gilles de Rais' trial and execution rippled through French society. His story became a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked power and moral decay. Yet, paradoxically, he was also remembered as a penitent sinner, a man who had sought forgiveness before death. This duality has fascinated historians, writers, and the public for centuries. The legend of Gilles de Rais grew, inspiring tales like the Bluebeard story, a nobleman who murdered his wives in secret. His life and crimes have been the subject of countless books, films, and scholarly debates. Some revisionists have questioned the fairness of his trial, pointing to the use of torture and the political motivations behind his prosecution. However, the weight of evidence and the consistency of witness testimonies make his guilt difficult to deny. Beyond the historical facts, Gilles de Rais' story forces us to confront profound questions about human nature. How does a man who once fought for his country become a monster who preys on children? What role do privilege, power, and social structures play in enabling evil? And how do societies reckon with such darkness when it emerges from within their own ranks? In exploring these questions, we gain insight not only into a dark chapter of medieval history, but also into the timeless struggle between good and evil, light and shadow, that defines the human experience. As we move to the final section, we will delve into the psychological and cultural legacy of Gilles de Rais, examining how his story continues to resonate and what it reveals about the nature of evil and redemption. The story of Gilles de Rais is not merely a historical curiosity. It is a mirror reflecting the darkest potentials of the human soul and the fragile boundaries that separate heroism from horror. His life, a tragic arc from celebrated knight to reviled murderer, challenges us to understand the forces that shape human behavior and the societal conditions that allow evil to flourish. Psychologically, Gilles de Rais embodies a complex and disturbing portrait. Some modern experts suggest he may have suffered from severe personality disorders, including psychopathy, a condition marked by a lack of empathy, remorse, and propensity for manipulation and violence. His actions reveal a chilling capacity for cruelty, combined with desperate need for control and power. The ritualistic nature of his crimes points to a mind consumed by obsession and delusion, seeking meaning and dominance through acts of terror. Yet, Gilles was also a product of his time. The medieval world was one of stark contrasts, where faith and superstition coexisted, where nobility wielded near absolute power, and where justice was often a tool of the powerful rather than a shield for the weak. The feudal system created vast inequalities, and the lives of peasants and children were often expendable in the eyes of the elite. This social context allowed Gilles de Rais to operate with impunity for years, his crimes hidden behind the walls of his castles and the silence of fear. His obsession with the occult and attempts to summon the devil reflect the era's deep anxieties about sin, salvation, and the supernatural. In a world where the devil was believed to walk among men, bargains with dark forces were feared and condemned. Gilles' Pact, whether real or imagined, symbolizes a profound spiritual crisis, a man who, having lost everything, sought power beyond the mortal realm, only to be consumed by it. Culturally, Gilles de Rais has left an indelible mark. His story inspired the Bluebeard legend, a tale of a nobleman who murders his wives and hides their bodies, a narrative that explores themes of secrecy, betrayal, and the monstrous hidden beneath civility. This mythic dimension elevates Gilles from a historical figure to a symbol of hidden evil lurking behind noble facades. In literature and film, Gilles' life has been revisited time and again, each retelling probing the nature of evil and the human capacity for darkness. From gothic horror to psychological thrillers, his story resonates because it confronts us with uncomfortable truths. That monsters come in the guise of heroes, that power can corrupt absolutely, and that evil often thrives in silence and complicity. The trial of Gilles de Rais also serves as a landmark in the history of criminal justice. It highlights the tensions between secular and ecclesiastical authority, the use of torture, and the challenges of prosecuting crimes committed by the powerful. His case reminds us of the importance of due process, the dangers of coerced confessions, and the need for vigilance in protecting the vulnerable. Today, Gilles de Rais is often cited as one of history's first documented serial killers, a grim precursor to the modern understanding of such criminals. His crimes, though centuries old, echo in contemporary discussions about the psychology of killers, the social factors that enable them, and the cultural fascination with true crime. But beyond the headlines and horror stories, Gilles de Rais' life is a cautionary tale about the human condition. It warns us of the perils of unchecked power, the consequences of moral decay, and the necessity of compassion and justice. It challenges us to look beyond appearances and question the structures that allow evil to hide in plain sight. In the end, the knight who sold his soul is a reminder that history is not just a record of dates, events, but a living narrative of human choices, of courage and cowardice, of light and shadow. Gilles de Rais' story compels us to confront the darkness within ourselves and our societies, to seek understanding, and to strive for a world where such horrors can never take root again. As we close this chapter on Gilles de Rais, we are left with a haunting question. How many others like him have slipped through the cracks of history, their stories untold, their victims forgotten? And what can we learn from the past to prevent such tragedies in future? The legacy of Gilles de Rais endures not only in the annals of crime, but in the ongoing human struggle to define justice, confront evil, and redeem the soul. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of medieval France. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's darkest tales.